he realizes that he and his soldiers don't know how to run a government, right? Some of them can barely read and write. They don't have government expertise. You know, they're soldiers. And he recognizes this. So he brings in these radicals, these radical intellectuals who have been educated in the United States, who do have advanced degrees, who do know about accounting and financing. Among these, of course, is Elizabeth Johnson Sirleaf, right? The current president of Liberia. She's one of the people they bring in, that Doe brings in, you know, to run things. But many of them soon leave the government because they see that Doe is an authoritarian worse than the Americas probably. A very smart politician. He knew how to pit enemies against each other, and he had the absolute loyalty of his fellow Cron in the army. They see that the elites around Doe and Doe himself are stealing blindly from the government treasury, stealing blindly from the populace, and they're disgusted by this. And they're also, you know, and some of them protest and stuff, and they're threatened. They're told, you know, go along or you're going to be in serious trouble. And so many of them flee. They leave Liberia, or they quit government and go into private business, or they go back to the university. They keep their heads down. And the government becomes increasingly repressive and also increasingly incompetent. I mean, the Americo-Liberians, when they ruled Liberia, they were corrupt, but they had a certain level of competence in running the government. You know, they were educated people. They had degrees. They were college graduates. They knew what they were doing. A lot of the Doe people, after the radicals left, didn't really know how to run a government, and things really ran into the ground. Tolbert had tried to reorient Liberia to be part of sort of that neutral group of third world nations that was neither on the side of the Soviet Union or on the side of America. You know, people like Indonesia and India and many African countries who were trying to steer a middle course. We're not going to side with either side in the Cold War. And in fact, he cut off relations with Taiwan and opened with Beijing. And so the Reagan Cold Warriors, when they came into office in 1980, viewed Tolbert suspiciously, and the old regime suspiciously. And Doe understood this. And so when Doe came to power, he said, I'm going to be pro-American. Completely, 100%, I support the United States of America. And the Reagan administration, people liked that. And they offered Doe a lot. The American government gave him a lot of money, a lot of weapons, training, so he could stay in power. In exchange, Doe allowed for an airfield in Liberia to be used to transship weapons to Angola. The Reagan administration was supporting rebels in Angola that were fighting a communist regime or a Soviet-supported regime in Angola. So Liberia offered its airfields, and the Reagan administration built a huge runway at Roberts Field outside Monrovia. Doe allowed them to ship weapons to the anti-communist rebels in Angola that the Reagan administration was supporting. Thomas Kawankpa was very popular among the troops. He was kind of one of the soldiers. You know, he lived with them, he suffered with them, he was supposedly quite eloquent speaker. And so Kawankpa then organizes a coup against Doe. Doe is able to put the coup down. Kawankpa is hunted down and executed as the only possible alternative within the military community to challenge Doe gone. I think at that point in 1985, the stolen election, the murder of Kawankpa, I think that's when you start seeing some of those old radicals, not so ideologically inclined people, begin to sort of see Doe has got to go.
And the Liberia rebel group of National Patriotic Front of Liberia, NPFL, led by Charles Taylor, launched a rebellion against President Samuel Doe of Liberia.
We are the commandos! Special force commandos! Special force commandos!
This is just an ordinary civilian uprising. It's not a military coup, not a military situation. Ordinary people uprising, trying to bring fair play and justice.
And what if he doesn't?
We'll kill him. If he doesn't give himself up, which means that he wants to fight, we'll kill him.
Charles Taylor has no right to ask my resignation. We have a government that was duly elected by the people of this country. And anything that has to do with resignation must come from the people themselves and not Mr. Charles Taylor. So to answer your question, I'm not going to resign.
In 1970, in the late 1970s, I forget what year exactly, William Tolbert came to speak at the United Nations. This is back in the old regime. And Taylor had confronted him, had been part of a group that had confronted him, and had gotten in trouble for that. And then later, under Doe, Taylor was brought in, one of those kind of educated radicals who was brought in by Doe. But rather than trying to reform Liberia, Taylor, who was head of the government administration office or whatever it was called in Liberia, they're the ones who buy all the stuff for the government. You know, the government needs desks, the government needs supplies, the government needs, you know, whatever the government needs, he's the guy who buys it all. He runs that office, okay, the supply office for the government. Now you can imagine that is a great job if you want to embezzle. And he embezzled a lot. Almost $1 million, which is a lot of money for Liberia. And Doe then tried to have him arrested. Taylor was fled to the United States. Doe tried to have him extradited. Taylor escapes from a jail in the United States, probably by bribing some guards. And he makes his way back to Africa. He signs up with Muammar Gaddafi in Libya, who at that time was considered himself a great liberator of Africa. And Gaddafi saw Doe. Remember, Gaddafi, if you remember at that time, Gaddafi and the United States did not have a great relationship at that time. Remember, Reagan bombed him. He was seen as a leading exporter of terrorism. And so Gaddafi saw Liberia as this pro-American government run by this pro-American Samuel Doe, and he saw Taylor as maybe a way of knocking him off, right, and getting an ally in Liberia and knocking off the pro-Reagan Doe. So Taylor goes to Libya. He brings a bunch of guys with him, a bunch of fellow guillots, and they get trained, they get armed by Gaddafi, and eventually they go back and they invade.
Our leader, you right!
We want to work along with Congress and for the American people to understand that this is not a bunch of headhunters out here in West Africa trying to shoot up a country for power. I have no interest in that.
Doe is so unpopular with the people by this point, hated by the people, especially the Guillaume Mono people, who really don't like him because he's been using all these Kron soldiers against them. They rise up with Taylor, and within 6 months, Taylor has taken over almost the entire country except right around Monrovia. Well, almost immediately, Taylor's group splinters. And one of the groups that splits off to him is some of the Mandingo people split off from him. And some other groups split off from him. And one of the people that splits off from him is one of his top assistants, a guy named Prince Johnson. But he gains a group around him who are fearful of Taylor. There's, again, tribal issues start to come into play. And Prince Johnson takes control of certain districts on the edge of Monrovia. And at a certain point, Doe in 1990 decides that his position is no longer tenable. He can hardly leave the executive mansion. He's got a squad of Israeli trained soldiers, Quran soldiers, protecting him, and that's about all he's got. So he arranges with ECOMOG, which is the West African force that had gone into Liberia to try to stop the civil war. It's basically, ECOMOG at that point was pretty much led by Nigeria. It was the Nigerians say to Doe, look, we will arrange you to get out of here. We'll send some troops, some ECOMOG troops, and we will help you to get out of the country. And you can fly to America.
And what happened at that point?
And at that point what happens is, again, nobody knows exactly what happened, but Prince Johnson's guys seize Doe from the ECOMOG troops, take him back to Prince Johnson's headquarters.
I captured the president, Samuel Doe. I was finished with war. I came December 24th, 1989 to Liberia. And I walked my way from the border Ivory Coast to the capital. September 9, 1990, Samuel Doe was captured.
Prince. You need my custody. Yeah. You can tie my feet, but my hands swell up there. No, come.
And that was the end of the war for me. I never fought again. If I were the most notorious war criminal, Nigeria peacekeeping force under the watchful eyes of the international community would never have taken me from here with my family for safety in Nigeria.
The aftermath of his capture, events that unfold in different countries, throw a light on that on the suspicion that ECOMOG was partly involved into the capture of Doe, or arrange, the capture of Doe, or the betrayal of the trust that Doe had for them. The main commander, which was General Queno, he was a Ghanaian. Danganyaro was his deputy. So in the process, Doe was captured through a lot of representatives of different security members who were involved in the direction of ECOMOG. Some of them also lost their jobs.
Two years later, on March 23, 1991, the Sierra Leone rebel group, the Revolutionary United Front, led by Fode Sanko and backed by Charles Taylor, launched its first attacks in villages of Calhoun district and diamond-rich eastern province of Sierra Leone. It was the beginning of more than 10 years of the bloodiest civil wars in West Africa history. An estimated 70,000 people were killed in Sierra Leone. More than 200,000 lost their lives in Liberia and displaced millions of people.
Taylor had connections with the RUF because when Taylor was fighting his civil war against Doe, he used Sierra Leoneans in his ranks. He had connections with them that went back to the fight against Doe in the 90s, when the RUF was starting its fight against the government in Freetown. But what he saw in Sierra Leone once he took power, because the civil war continued in Sierra Leone has a lot of diamonds. And he saw the ability to trade weapons with the RUF, to provide them weapons. In exchange, the RUF, which controlled a lot of the mines in eastern Sierra Leone where the diamonds were, that they would trade diamonds for weapons. And Taylor would then take those diamonds and make himself rich. Two reasons. It was to get the diamonds, and two, that if the RUF took power, they would be under his control, right? They would be his people in Freetown that he would control. Because again, he had these ambitions to be the leader of that whole part of Africa.
Took up arms against a corrupt political system by then headed by former President Joseph Sadu Momo. in 1991. But our leader, Corporal Fode Sebana Sanko, started organizing RUF as far back as in the 80s.
I think it has to do with the collapse of the state, because for 3 decades we had undemocratic states, we have a massive corruption, mismanagement, and even though Sierra Leone, by virtue of the resources we have, is supposed to be one of the richest countries in the world, but through so many years of mismanagement, we lost that. And obviously the poverty increases. We had a high rate of poverty. Over 70% of the population was very poor.
On loue le chef de l'État. On l'engage dans des directions uniquement pour être à côté de lui et bénéficier de ses faveurs. Je crois que aimer le président, c'est lui dire, dans le respect, au nom de Dieu, ce que nous pensons être la volonté de Dieu et le bonheur de notre peuple.
À cause de la pauvreté, parce que, disons, il n'y a pas une moyenne classe en Sierra Leone. Il y a les pauvres carrément qui n'ont pas à manger, il y a les riches qui sont bien aisés, des belles maisons, des belles voitures et tout ça, et des gens qui n'ont même pas le prix d'un sac de riz.
We produce this mineral to them. Then they got a lot of money. While we own the land, we don't have nothing. We can produce a lot of diamonds. Even today, even I don't even have a bicycle to ride. You understand? Why they are in the towns, because they have their money, then they have all top cars, you know, nice house to sleep, nice clothes to wear, eat good food.
Now the RUF, of course, was, as we all know, and gained a reputation for one of those brutal rebel armies in the history of the world.
Who do this to me? Was to earlier. I'm suffering now.
Yeah, they cut off people's. If somebody voted, the Sierra Leone's tried to hold elections that the RUF were excluded from. So people went to vote in those elections. And in the way they do it in many poor countries is you get a stain on your finger after you vote to make sure you don't vote again. So anybody caught with that stain, if the RUF caught them, they would cut off their hands as punishment.
We are innocent people. We are in our villages doing our domestic works, doing our plantation works. We don't know about government. We are not politicians. You see? We don't know what is government. Bring that small boy.
No, we want to be like bread.
How many people can give you? How many? No, you don't know.
Let's explain, Major.
Okay, explain.
Major, let's explain. The time Nami push the motor, Kami and Kini Brahma. Kini Brahma there for witness. This man where they drive this so.
But not be your mama this?
Yes, but I not been there. That explain.
I want to lap at you.
When I explain, give Major.
So your mama,
continue
with this man. Continue with this man. Wait. When I'm Jim's man, I'm going to Jim's
Major.
Don't call my name here. Don't call my name. Call my name, I'll fire you.
I'm captured. Commander Saidu. I'm Commander Saidu. Eh?
All right, just
Commander Saidu captured.
English or Yoruba you talk?
Okay.
I hear you talk. What's your name?
Me and Lieutenant M. Kamara.
Sorry?
Lieutenant M. Kamara.
Elias. What's your know you as?
Elias Lieutenant Safaiko.
Not you know the Captain Kota?
No.
What's Elias waiting?
Lieutenant Safaiko.
Go there.
Let's see.
ECOMOG is the sole means of protection for ordinary people from rebel atrocities and presents the only hope in the short term of bringing peace and security to Sierra Leone. The courage, determination and sacrifice of the ECOMOG soldiers from Nigeria, Ghana, Guinea and Mali deserve our praise and gratitude. ECOMOG's deployment in Sierra Leone has represented a milestone in the development of regional peacekeeping, which the Council has rightly commended.
ECOMOG needs our support. The United States has contributed $9 million to provide logistical support to ECOMOG, and we are seeking to do more. The United Kingdom, the Netherlands, Canada, and other member states have also contributed to help ECOMOG.
ECOMOG became a force that was met with a lot of controversial, understanding, because West Africa, we have British West Africa and we have, French West Africa. So there was not a complete agreement among these different colonial, background. So the French West Africa or the French-speaking countries in West Africa felt like they were left behind, or they were not properly involved into the creation of the leadership. They felt like the British West Africa took over the formation of the leadership, which apparently in some levels in some quarters they were right, because if you look at the whole ECOMOG leadership was majority of leaders were from Nigeria. Nigeria is one of the Anglophone countries. Like in the initial stage of their intervention, especially in Monrovia, especially in Liberia, there were a lot of ECOMOG troops that were involved into some kind of looting. Some of them, had genuine intention, to participate or to help in the effort. But that kind of gave the populations some kind of uneasiness. How can a force that has come to liberate us now is trying to plunder our resources that we have on the ground? And but also overall, there was a great deal of recognition for their effort. Because everybody were looking towards the West. When will the West come and help us? Because at this time, America has already extracted, America and most Western states or Western countries have already extracted their own citizens, from the region. So it was only under the leadership of, ECOMOG that the Africans or the people of West Africa felt like, oh, at least there's somebody watching out for us. So, we can say it was a mixed feeling, but I think the good outweighed the bad feelings against the force.
Abara findi mara girira dingera sima ngedira si gina kamera si duma di forira si o ga findi ga katora la gine